The news media are supposed to be about the news, not political spin. But too much of what you see on so-called news channels these days are just cheap partisan talking points designed to push a narrative rather than to objectively inform. Let's talk about the battle over new election laws. Last year during the pandemic, states adopted a lot of new and exotic voting techniques. Drive-in voting, massive vote by mail, unattended drop boxes, a lot of new and unprecedented stuff, so now states are moving to update their rules to make sure that only eligible voters are voting. And of course, Democrats are claiming that these new rule changes are restrictions and suppression motivated by racist Republicans. Instead of calling out the Democrats for their shameless hyperbole, the news media are helping them discredit any rules aimed at making elections more secure. You hear the same language over and over again, like an advertising campaign, because that's exactly what it is. As we listen to what the media are saying here, keep in mind, none of these laws would actually restrict any eligible citizens from voting on Election Day, or voting early, or voting by mail if they needed to. The claim that these laws would prevent voters from voting is fantasy. You don't get a home security system to keep out wanted guests. Anyway, let's dive in.
Republicans in at least 43 states now introducing bills to restrict access.
22 states have passed voter suppression laws.
Voter suppression laws that are advancing.
A Republican bill designed to suppress voting.
Voter suppression laws.
These voter suppression laws.
New voting restrictions laws signed today.
One of the most restrictive
voting bills in the country.
So obviously there's a pattern here, and of course, it's pretty negative in tone. Now let's compare this coverage to how so-called journalists talk about the Democrats' federal power grab called the For the People Act, which would override state laws, doesn't matter if they're new or long-standing, including outlawing popular election measures such as voter ID employed by 36 states. Here we have a host of election laws, passed in state houses around the country by lawmakers elected by the people. For a small cadre of liberals in Washington, D.C. to override all of that on a purely party-line vote would seem extremely undemocratic. But that's not how the media are selling it. They want viewers to think that Democrats are just trying to protect voter rights.
Democrats' top priority for protecting voting rights, the For the People Act.
The For the People Act, which would be a sort of baseline threshold of voting access.
A nationwide floor of voting rights like what's contained in H.R. 1.
Action on the federal level protecting voting rights.
A kind of new version of the Voting Rights Act.
Republicans are so terrified of the For the People Act because they know it'll fix our democracy in the very ways that they're trying to undermine it.
All of this heavy-handed coverage boils down to just another example of the whole problem with the media. That is, partisan journalists have abandoned reporting the news in favor of propaganda and political advocacy. That's why viewers need to make sure that they're getting all sides of the story, not just one-sided rhetoric.